Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Hope everybody's doing well. We are ready to get into our next session here in our series, our ongoing series, looking at Clay's quilt. Is that backwards to you all? Can you all see that? Okay, good. So we're excited about it. Let's. How did you guys have a good? Hope you had a good last week. We're ready to go. So. Not really sure how to roll this out, but we talked last week a little bit about the first 7 chapters, I think. I think it was the first 7, and kind of laid the foundation of where we're going to go from here. So we know that we are going to look at some of the deeper thematic issues that are emerging from the book today and talk a little bit about those. I'll just remind you kind of our ground rules, and that is anybody can talk at any time. So jump in there whenever you have something to say. We'd love to hear from you. I obviously do not want to be the only person talking. That's not a book study. That's just a book lecture, and that's not what I want to do today. And hopefully that's not what will happen. So after the first 7 chapters, and we started talking about some of the emerging themes, this week we moved into chapters 8 through 14, looking at those as well. So we're excited about what's happening next in this book as we continue to work our way through. A couple of some of you, I'm guessing many of you have probably already finished the book as well. So it's kind of hard for us this morning as we have talked about this, is like we've kind of structured this to be in sections. And that's kind of a little bit difficult when you've read ahead and you kind of know what's all of the things that are going on. But still, we will do our best to kind of stay in our lane and keep us moving. So this is our second week of this study. Next week, we will come back together again for our third time. We'll finish up our views of the book. And then we will move from there into the week after that, where the author of the book, Silas House, will be joining us for our hour-long study to talk about kind of his view of the book. He wrote it. He'll know kind of more details about things and some of the themes that we see emerging. And so we're going to have a couple of things that we're going to do today. We're going to have some conversation, but at some point we're also going to be writing down some questions for Silas as we go through. So I want you to be thinking about that as we're having our conversations, that we want to make sure that when Silas gets here, we do have some good conversation with him as well. So please be thinking about through our conversation what you'd like to ask, and then we're going to ask to give you a little bit of time during this to write those down as we go. So that's kind of where we are. So we saw last time some of the themes that emerged. I mean, we probably all of you remember some of those themes that came out. We looked at themes of poverty, themes of drug use throughout the book, themes of geography. We talked about music, the importance of family, all of those kinds of things that have kind of come out through this. And so before we get any further, I'm just going to open the floor. And what other themes are you guys seeing emerge through this book that now that we've moved on through chapter 14? Don't everybody talk at once.
I think family's a big theme. There was an offhand comment made that basically most of us are related in some form or fashion and stuff. And even in the bar fight, they didn't ask questions. They didn't like, what's going on? Here we go. Let's go. You know, you mess with one, you mess with all of us. You ever seen the movie Roadhouse? You know, that's kind of a, you know, or next of kin, I should say. That's kind of along the lines. You don't have to give me a reason on why we're fighting this dude. We're just fighting because you're fighting him or whatnot. And but family's a big theme. They're constantly relying on one another, going to one another, seeking solace, seeking advice, seeking just comfort or whatever and stuff. So I think family's a big theme, and it doesn't matter if it's cousins, step, in-laws, whatever. They're all relying on one another.
Absolutely.
I think the love of nature, the outdoors, because he's always talking about the trees, the water, everything. He paints a picture to where you see it. And I just think that's very intentional on his part, that how important that area is to the families that live there, that it's a part of them.
Thank you.
To play on what Sherry's talking about with the nature, not only does he describe nature in almost everything that he describes, but it's the minute detail.
Mhm.
It's the, how the flowers look, the way the snow is on the petals of the dogwoods, or the ice is on the petals of the dogwood. It's almost as if he's has to draw us a picture, and we can see it so clearly because of the just the
Very much.
tiny little details that he gives. And I think that's a reflection of the depth that with which he writes. He doesn't just skim the surface with the scenery, but the depth of which he writes. And I think it's sort of a reflection too of the depth that he sees in people. Everything about his descriptions are very clear to the reader.
It is. It actually, the imagery there, and you mentioned the dogwood tree. It took me back. I grew up in this area, and I know many of you have grown up in similar areas to this of kind of what's described in the book. But I kind of have moved on from that and have moved away. And I moved out when I was 17 and went to college. I never moved back home after that. I was kind of always out. Um, and I've kind of forgotten a lot of things about growing up. I feel like I've lived three different lifetimes. I've had like three major components of my life that are all very different and compartmentalized from the others. And so that early first 17 years is like the first chapter, the first part of the book. And it's a book that I read a long time ago that I don't remember a lot of the details from. But when he has the such vivid imagery in this book, it takes me back to that really easily. And the dogwood tree is one of those. I remember like growing up in a very small Baptist church. We had 30 people there on a Sunday, and that was a good turnout. I mean, it was a very small congregation, and it was an old white cinder block painted church on the side of a hill, and it was surrounded by dogwood trees. And it reminded me when he talked about kind of that symbolism of the dogwood, that it's the cross with the blood around the edges of and I remember having those conversations that I've forgotten about. So I think that imagery in here really does kind of it did for me at least, transported me back to a time where that was much more relevant in my thought and than it is now. So I agree. I like his detailed imagery and how it can transport us places, not just in imagery, but in time too.
Ronnie, I think it's interesting that you brought up the church too. That really hits home with me, having grown up in an small independent Baptist church, and some of the interplay inside your heart when you're not in the church, and then just some of the verbiage and the words coming out. That was such, I don't want to say it's a cliche, but it mirrored a lot of what I grew up with. Well, you have to be at the church and you have to do this, and you can't, if you're doing this, you're wrong. And what's that old joke they say about Baptists is, if you want to go fishing with the Baptists, make sure you bring two so they don't drink your beer. And so that's very much that dichotomy, right? That you grow up in those independent Baptist churches, and I think that plays inside of his mindset in every setting that he's in.
It does. Thank you. Any other thoughts before I'm going to circle back to Jeremy's in just a minute. Other thoughts of themes that you all saw?
I think the family theme is just a really good theme overall in this book, because I think in these chapters, this is where he found out about his real dad, and he tries to go and just see where he lives, but he's kind of, back and forth on, do I really want to meet him? Do I not want to meet him? And his girlfriend's trying to get him to meet him, but he's just like, okay, one step at a time. I just want to see where he lives right now. And so I think just that family just really hits home for him.
Yeah, you're right, man. And we talked a little bit about that last week, that draw back to that family connection, even though, again, he's never met this person, wasn't part of his life, but that draw that we have that pulls us back there, and how that relates to our students. I want us to keep that in mind as we talk about this book, that's really the purpose of having this. I mean, it's a great book. It's fun for us to read too. I love having the conversation about it, but at the end of the day, it really is about how does this circle back to our population of students, and how would this impact them, and what conversations could we have with those folks?
That's why Rhonda's theme that she brought up in the chat about resilience is that couldn't be more appropriate, to our kids.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So one of the things, I'll circle back to Jeremy, and we'll kind of start there with kind of one of the themes, and it was, we talked about religion. I noticed that all of us have kind of, or at least we kind of, those who have shared have talked about kind of the religious imagery. I mean, it's obvious that it's throughout the book. But I really think that that religion is juxtaposed pretty beautifully against what I would kind of, the idea of sin, throughout the book. And so we have what kind of, as we step back, what is a very religious based society here being described, right? But at the same time, and you have, these great sins that are happening throughout the book. You have drug use, and you have all of this cursing, you have adultery and domestic violence, you have physical and emotional abuse that's happening, and all of these kinds of the dark underbelly of kind of the society. And it's not just this particular, region. I mean, it can be anywhere, but we have that kind of that juxtaposition between the two. And so I'm interested in you all, like, hearing from you. How did that impact your reading of the book? How does that, have you thought about it in that context, and what does that mean for you? That comparison, or those two running kind of themes that are running parallel to each other, often intertwined even throughout this book. When we have Denzel, who is an abusive husband, who is an adulterer, and all of these other things, who at the same time is a deacon in his church, right? And that's one of the things that Alma was originally kind of drawn to him about, and his love of old music and the church, and yet he has this really dark side. So tell me a little bit about kind of how you understood that throughout the book, and what that meant to you as you read.
I think what you're talking about, the juxtaposition of the religion versus the sin, is something our students could relate to in terms of their lives. The fact that very often they live in homes where those kinds of sins are a problem, but yet at the same time, society expects them to be able to realize that some of those things are against the law or against nature. And yet it seems so common for them if they grew up in homes like that. And so why would they think that there's something wrong with that? And I think that's part of the reason why he uses the juxtaposition there, is to let you see how common it is, and yet how society as a whole expects us to understand the differences between the two.
It's a very gray area, I think, for our students in particular. Growing up, sometimes in environments where religion was used to justify some of the behaviors that have happened. I remember years ago visiting Ramey Estep and meeting a student who was there, who wrote one of my favorite poems, and so it was included in their book that they published. And she talked about in this poem the abuse that she endured from her father, and that her mother was a willing accomplice, and essentially like held her down, kept a lookout for her, and that it was kind of all wrapped up in this kind of false religion. It's not true religion. It's not what many of us kind of believe about religion. But it certainly was used as a tool for them to gain power over her and to control her. And it was very difficult, I think, for her to understand that those things aren't the same. But it relates to a lot of our kids. And I mean, that's a student who had been abused and neglected and was removed from her home, like many of our kids that we work with. And that understanding of religion. And so as we read this book with our kids, and we talk and we, have conversations with them around it, and they see, I think, some of the parallels maybe from their own life that Peggy was talking about in this book about the importance of church, the importance of that community, yet also the terrible abuse that many of them have experienced. How do we have conversations about that? So I think we have to be cognizant of that as we enter into conversations with them. We want to make sure that we're aware of that and we're not taken off guard, that if those kinds of things emerge, we need to be ready. And so that's why I wanted to bring this up. I think it's a pretty interesting view, and it shows, I think, the complexity of the place. And one of the things that, if you've read about Silas and his work, if you've outside of this book, he talks about one of his main goals in writing about this region that he grew up in is to demonstrate and illustrate the complexity of the people, that it's not just a one-dimensional experience, that it's not just these are folks who are very religious or simple-minded or whatever else stereotypes might be out there, but there's a lot of complexity to it. And that complexity of that religion paired with this, all of these things that we would say are not the best things to be happening in a community, but they're existing in the same area at the same time together.
Well, and the fact that we talked about this book being in the 70s, that we felt like it was in the 70s, so many of our kids can still feel like this is going on today. A lot, in our rural areas, they'll go to the club on Saturday night and then they'll go to church on Sunday morning. And so that parallel is there of how their life is.
I feel very attacked right now, Sherry.
Through what? You froze.
You're cutting out on us, I think. Everybody else.
I'll try again.
Did she cut out on everybody else?
I think it's you.
Okay.
But the parallel,
Is it just me?
yeah.
Yeah, I think it's your connection, Ronnie.
Oh, well, there you go.
But our kids still see this today of people going to the club on Saturday night and then going to church on Sunday morning and all of that going on in their lives, and trying to say, well, how can you be religious if you're doing this? It's a battle that they have to think about too.
I thought it was interesting throughout the book how Cake and Clay, there was mentions that the way they were living, that they couldn't be involved. I think they had some guilt about being involved with the church to the level of some of their other family members. But there were aspects of Clay throughout that showed that he was a spiritual person as far as his love for nature,
Yeah.
the time he was in the wilderness and felt that connection to something higher than himself. Right there in the wilderness, and he had that kind of an inner voice that told him right from wrong throughout the book. So even though he wasn't involved with the church, I felt like he showed throughout, a sense of being spiritual.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when he described that he was in church with Easter one day and he decided that he was going to go to the restroom, and he left there and went up to the top of the mountain, and he said that's where church is for him. Church is not a building. Church is the people. And, so it's about your connection with something greater than yourself. And he certainly demonstrated throughout the book that he had that, and that it wasn't just about a building.
Ronnie, I think where you were talking about the kid from Ramey Estep, I think it's very interesting that you say that, because I've had my own experiences with that from kids from around here. And I think it's important when we address that because we're not only trying to make them understand that is not normal, but we don't want to drive them away from religion as well. And I think that's a hard thing to do, because they tend to say, well, then religion then I'm going to go to atheism, or I'm going to go to some other thing, not to be on a religious kick, but you still don't want them to not believe in God either. So there, that, like you said, there's a three-dimensional thing there with those kids as well. I mean, you can drive them in a different direction, and it's really difficult. You can put them in a different place in their life, which might not be good as well.
Yeah. And Heather, I think this is illustrated perfectly by Sarah Vivian in the comments, who kind of is echoing what you're saying here. And she talked about a meeting with a student and the father just kept saying that to the student, that if she would just accept Jesus, her life would be fine and everything would be back together. And her response in that moment was, well, God let me be raped by my brother. And then he went on to talk about the way that they used Jesus to cover up that happening and all of the wrong things that had happened to her. And so it is that that fine line of conversation with students about how do we share that this is a wrong thing that has happened, right? But that we also don't put our own beliefs on our students. That's not our goal either. Our job is not, as teachers and educators, to be evangelists either. I mean, it's to help our students find their way by providing them with opportunities for learning, right? And so some of our students may get to a point where they understand that this is not what your experience has been with religion, or some of their classmates' experience.
Well, see, I had my son, his friend came to my house, and he was suicidal because he was from a Pentecostal background, and they were wanting to do exorcisms on him because he had come out gay. And they pretty much told him that they would rather him be dead than gay. And he just pretty much said, well, I just might as well kill myself because this is what I am. So he now lives with me, and, it's been 8 months and he is much better. I mean, we've got him clearer in his mind, but my concern is I don't want to drive him away from religion. I don't want to take that part away from him, but my God, we're not going to tie him down and drive the devil out of him. He is who he is, and it's mind boggling what this area can do and that they feel is normal, and that children need to realize that this is how it is, and they need not, you don't backtalk that.
Yeah. I think that's one of the interesting things about our programs and when we see success in students. So we know that our students come to us with some pretty substantial academic gaps, right? So we know that. We know that based on the data, but we also know that they come to us oftentimes with gaps also in emotional intelligence, right? So they've been exposed to different things than what we or the state or kind of what we believe is kind of a more traditional life experience. And so when we expose them to places where it's safe, where they're taken care of, where they're loved and well fed, and that they're nurtured, and all of those kinds of things are met, how quickly our students can demonstrate success in other areas, not just in that, but in other areas. And it's providing that environment, I think, really helps and to show that this is a different kind of normal. And that and I try really hard to, in this, it's very clear. I mean, there's some things that are very clear. There's a right and a wrong, but some things there are just different ways that people live. And that's fine. I think of, I talked about this last week, but my daughter, when we first took her in as a foster child, when we first welcomed her to our house, her half brother also came to us, and so we had two. You guys might remember that from way back in the day. We welcomed two foster kids into our house, and they have different dads. And as it turns out, the brother, who's the half brother, his dad came back into the picture. Turned out he was somewhat stable. And that he wanted to be involved in that child's life. And so the half brother lives with him and has lived with him for the last 5 or 6 years. And that's fine. It's a different life than what our daughter has. And I try to be very clear that it's not a better life. It's not a worse life than what she has. It's just very different than their experiences. And so I try not to, to put my values of what I think are important about a life and about a community onto other people. But I do want to show this is a different way of surviving and living, and so that they can make their own decisions based on that.
I think one of the biggest things we could do, or the biggest tools we have, is to prioritize social emotional learning just as much as we do academics, especially for our kids. But we just come to that point in society with the things, with technology and the, just all the issues that we have in the world today. I feel like we've got to prioritize social emotional learning across the board from the time they start school with us. And I know we're learning more about that and how to be effective with it. And it's not always super clear on what exactly it is, but I think that's, we've got to make a greater effort for the SEL stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And you can see it has, if you've been following kind of educational hyperbole over the last, over the last year or so, social emotional learning is certainly at the forefront. We have transitioned a lot from kind of catchphrases of trauma-informed care. And while we still, obviously that's very important and a critical component of social emotional learning, that SE much larger umbrella that's getting a lot more attention these days has in the past.
I think Travis builds on a good
Am I
point.
cutting out to you guys? I just got noticed that my connection is unstable.
Yeah, you just cut out.
Just now? Okay.
Uh,
Well, just remember, Sherry and Kate out. You guys are on.
I think Travis brings a good point, and that's actually interesting enough, one of his kind of focus areas over the next few years that he's chosen to take on, which is really cool because he's trying to build a high school curriculum wrapped around it, because a lot of the SEL stuff that we get is very elementary a lot of times. So when you think about a book like this, it's kind of a non-threatening way to bring up the themes that we need to address. Because there are so many different themes of some of the negative, traumatic things in that we know about trauma that can be addressed through talking about a book. Miss Miller, who's also on this call, one of our English teachers, always teaches speak most years. The first semester, that was our first semester book study for the entire school, and it hits on some big themes within there on bullying, and there's another book she does on rape, and I believe that's the same one, but I'm maybe confused them, but it gives kind of a, it's not, we're not talking about you, we're talking about this, and here's some things that we can do maybe. And so it allows you to actually talk about these tough things without making it about, I'm talking to you directly about your problems.
And I think that's exactly right. When we have these conversations, it makes it a safe place to have these conversations. And, we may be talking about a book or a story, but our students can relate to that. And that, anytime we feel safe and anytime we feel like it's a common theme, then we start to open up and have conversations about that. And that's what's so important, is to get those conversations going, because sometimes everybody walks around with so much pain because they think no one else has ever been through what they've been through. And then when you open up and you start having these conversations, I think that's when people let their guard down and do start talking about that.
Well, that's something I'd love to brag on these two specifically, and Mr. Hepler, who's in here. All my three teachers are in here. I love it. And I can brag on them, is that they do a good job of inserting short response writing based on it. And it's amazing the personal information that comes out of that, related back to the literature or the Achieve 3000 story that Travis specifically picks, or Mr. Hepler does an actual essay, and it's an argumentative. So it's amazing how all of a sudden their voice comes out and you learn more about them through the writing, but also related to the book.
And
I
I
want
think,
to make sure we draw our attention to Nick over in the comments, who's making
yeah,
some
that
good
was,
points over there
yeah.
as well. So I don't want those to go unnoticed. If you're reading in the chat book, on the chat side over there, it's some really good information about being role models and how we demonstrate normality to our students, and how we do that through our lived lives, and show them that there's a different reality that we can present to them than what maybe they have experienced, because we don't know exactly what that is. So it's 10:30. We have about 30 minutes left. I'm going to transition just a little bit, because I think there's an area here that I want us to draw some connections and help each other with, because I don't really know exactly how to do this. So I'm just going to put it out there. This book is very Appalachian focused. It's very rural focused. It talks a lot about kind of the rural experience of students. And while many of our students, that has been their experience, either in Eastern Kentucky and Western Kentucky, kind of in the most of our state is very rural. You all know that. But about 40% of our students across the state come from Jefferson County, our largest urban area. We have a disproportionate number of minority students in our programs, which has been a huge concern for us. And so I'm interested in hearing those of you who are teaching and out in the field, how is this book relatable? I don't want to discard the experience, and that this shouldn't be the only book we use in our classes. But if we're using this book, how do we draw some parallels? How do we bring in students who may have had a very different experience than that is illustrated in this text?
Ronnie, who's the professor at Eastern that has been doing a lot of the diversity training for KESA, and he's from Bell County?
Is it Roger Cleveland? I froze up. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think Jeremy, something happened with his.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roger Cleveland would be my guess, but I didn't know that he was doing stuff with KASA. That's interesting.
Who is, I'm sorry, say that again. I froze.
Is it Roger Cleveland?
Yes, yes. So KSA, one of our main themes that the board took on starting in September was starting to put a light on equity. And Roger is one of the first people that we brought in at a board retreat we had, I think it was like September, November. And one of the best things that he said that I appreciated was, and by the way, if you can involve him in any way.
I think we lost him again. I hope, did everybody else lose him too?
He's just
Yeah.
pausing for dramatic effect.
I did.
Me realize what implicit biases I have. And I know there are a lot that I didn't even know I maybe had. And that's kind of his deal, is he's able to, in a non-threatening manner, help you kind of be introspective and realize what implicit biases in your language, in your thought, and all those different things. But one of the big things he brought out is, yes, there's equity issues with race, there's equity issues with, all kinds of things, but the number one equity issue in Kentucky is poverty. And it's a common theme across all of our kids for the most part. And it's a common theme across, I think he figured like 80 some odd % of our kids, the poverty issue was the great unifying thing across all classifications.
And I'll just share that I think one of the things, and when we talk about implicit bias, and one of the things that we've talked about with Roger in the past, is that it's very easy. It's easier to talk with folks across Kentucky about the common experience of poverty, because it brings us in a non-threatening way, because many of us, those of us who are white, who have experiences that are very different than maybe some of our students of color from more urban areas, that it brings us in a non-threatening way to be able to talk about something that overlaps, that is non-threatening, but also something we can relate to. And so it gives us kind of a clean slate for us to jump off of. to have those conversations. But I think once you jump from that, you have to then dig deeper into that there are very substantial differences about race and about the impacts of race on your experience, the interaction in your community based on your race. I mean, there's lots of different things that are going on. If we've learned anything in the last year, as we have had some social justice and racial justice inequities brought up in a more prominent way than maybe many of us have experienced, many of us who are white have experienced, is that, you know, this is something that is critical for us to have discussions about. We can't just, we can start as a jumping off point of saying, here's some commonalities we have and where we are, but we also then have to dig down and say, let's talk about the very real lived experiences of our students who are disproportionately represented in our programs. And so I think of like the themes in this book. And when we are bringing those students into the conversation, it might be very easy for them to say, I don't even know what a holler is, you know? And I remember Justin kind of talking back a while of saying, I didn't know what a holler was, or didn't know, we don't have those in Western Kentucky. And so as you have students from there who are like, this just isn't relatable to me, that we have to dig down into the themes of the book that are relatable and that cross all kind of geographic boundaries that are illustrated in the book.
I think the language that you were talking about could be a comparison, because very often the language of the urban students that we have versus the rural students that we have, they can see that that's how rural people actually do talk in a lot of places. And just because it's different doesn't make it wrong. And therefore you could talk about the commonalities between us. Our language may not be exactly the same, but that doesn't make us different people, or doesn't make our values different, or doesn't make us wrong.
Good point.
I was going to say, I'm excited, you know, being in Frankfort, there are different, I feel like this could touch, of course, my kids that live downtown Frankfort. So for those of you who don't know, Frankfort has two different school districts. There is the Frankfort Independent School District, and it's right on the river. And then the county district is kind of pulled from all over the rest of the county. And some of the kids in the county schools come from haulers. I'm thinking kids around the Peaks Mill area, kids Devil's Hollow, and then there's just the diversity amongst the students, but same themes. And how, yes, some of the kids that go to the independent schools live on the river and are very poor. It's a different kind of poor than my kids up on in the haulers, and just listening to the dialect amongst different groups of kids in your building. But we're all similar in how we're all different. I think that would be great. We could even, you know, I'm thinking you could take a field trip just to show people like the different ways, not pointing out people's homes, but there are different ways that people live. We did that with our own staff. Like, before we get to know our students, let's go take a look at some of the communities that they're coming from.
Yeah.
Just to have a better.
I think that ties back to David Sullivan last week, who has used this book in his classes, where he talked a lot about the geography within the book. And learning about the different geographic and topography of Kentucky, and where different folks come from and what that looks like. I mean, even in the book, they talk about traveling to Lexington. They talk about traveling to Knoxville on 75. And then also, just Sherry mentioned earlier, so I'll just, initially, when we first started reading this book, it did seem like it was set in the 70s, but as it turns out, he was born in 1970. Right. So in this book, I mean, clearly we are talking about the early to mid 90s now. Right. So in this book, and we even have reference in the book to 1994 at some point. He mentions the year 1994 as being a good year or something like that. So we know that he was born in 1970 because we know that his mom died in 1974 and he was 4 years old. So we know that if he is 24-ish in this book, 22 to 24, then we're looking at early to mid 90s as the time reference, which is different than what I kind of immediately went to back when I first started reading the book and the imagery that I had. But I think Mark Twain said if he's going to be anywhere, it's going to be at the end of the world, it's going to be Kentucky because we're 20 years behind everybody else. So things that were happening in 1990 in Kentucky, maybe it did seem like the 70s. So I just wanted to bring up that issue of kind of that urban rural divide as we talk about this book, because it is very, very rural centric. It's very focused on the experiences of rural America and rural Kentucky in particular, and that we need to be prepared for those conversations and how we draw in our very diverse student population into this book as well.
I think it could be unifying in a sense because the issues are the same. The human condition we all deal with, and the things that come up throughout the book, we talked about the violence and the sexual abuse and the drug use, regardless of your culture and upbringing and, conditioning. Those are things that we all deal with at some point, whether we're in the, inner city or in a rural setting. So I think if someone from a different culture or background read the book, they could be like, oh yeah, that they deal with the same stuff I do,
And Travis, that's exactly what I'm trying to get us to think about if we use this book, is that we focus on those themes that cross cultures, right? So when we talk about the theme of family, I mean, it's very easy to talk about an urban experience of family and the parallels between that and a rural experience of family and the importance of family in that. So there's those themes that cross all. And so I think we have to be intentional when we have those conversations with our students so that they can draw those parallels as well, because I think a lot of our students who this might not be their lived experience as it is illustrated in this book may immediately say, well, this doesn't really apply. I don't know why you think this is so different than my experience. I'm not sure. But if we can talk about those thematic issues of the importance of family, the importance of religion, all of the underbelly of the society that is kind of running through this, if we pull those things out, it does cross all of those cultures. And then we can make this more relevant to every student, not just those who may have had a very similar lived experience. So one of the major things I think that happened in this section of the book for me, I don't know if you guys do this, but I cried in every chapter of this book. There's not a single, I mean, I read part of it I know Justin's like, no, I didn't cry at all. Every chapter I cried, every one. I read, I think, chapter 9, which is the letter from the mother from Aneth. That was in chapter 9, I think. And I read that in my office one day last week toward the end of the day as I was wrapping things up. And I just kept going from my office out into the hallway saying, have you guys got to chapter 9? What's going on? And I was a complete emotional wreck on chapter 9 at this letter. So I'm interested in hearing kind of your all's thoughts about the letter, but most importantly, let's talk a little bit about the letter that was in chapter 9. I think it started on page 117 and kind of illustrated. It was the letter to Clay that Aneth wrote back before she passed away. And so tell us a little bit about your thoughts about that letter, but then also the importance of that letter in this novel. Why is it important to include that here? Tell me what we got from that letter. I'd love to hear from you all.
It's hard for me to relate to that because I still have both of my parents. So I'm not coming from the stance of I lost a parent very young and I wish I had something or could say or hear from them. But I have had a parent several years ago. I lost a student through an accidental death when I was at Carlisle County. And the mom called up to the school looking for anything that her son had written while he was at school, back during portfolio time and things like that. She wanted any kind of writing that he had done while he was at school to have as a memory of him. So I know there's power there in having somebody's last words or something written through their thought process or whatnot. While I can't relate to that because I've been fortunate not to have to experience that yet. I can sympathize and understand that it is a very powerful thing because I've seen it from a mother wanting something of her child and stuff. So I imagine that I'm sure it was very hard to pick up and read. And then I imagine it's probably just as hard to put down once he started to be able to peer into, because I know he talked about having memories of her, but, you know, I know he was probably dying for anything that he could get a hold of. And once he started reading that, I'm sure it was very powerful.
I thought it was good because I pictured his mother as kind of like this Janis Joplin free spirit, uh, always drinking and partying kind of character. And you know, in the community, there were probably tons of people who kind of judged her for that lifestyle. And Clay could probably sense those things. But then you get this letter, which kind of lets you into her thoughts and her heart a little bit, you know, and she wasn't as crazy as she probably seemed to be. I think that was important for Clay, but it also gave me a different perspective on Anth, just hearing her explain her life choices a little bit.
Yeah, it filled in a lot of the blanks I think that we had in her life story, and filled in kind of, as Peggy talked earlier, the beauty of his description of Silas's description of people in the book and how detailed it was. This really, I think the letter was a great like literary style choice to enclose in the book, right? Because it gave us a window into an experience that she had that we weren't going to get otherwise in this. So, you know, it talked about, and I think it did really, gosh, it was beautiful, I thought, in a lot of ways, in the way it described her and her experience and the freedom that she really seemed to relish in, you know, that kind of, she was really a free spirit in a lot of ways and loved nature and loved life. But also kind of had like some sadness there too, right? So there's that sadness underneath about knowing that the vision that her life was going to be cut short, and then trying to live life to its fullest before that happened.
I thought, oh, go ahead.
Another interesting thing was when his Aunt Esther was being so patient with him. And it's, you know, the phrase peeling back an onion was allowing him to go through this on his own time frame, like you would do in therapy or whatever. And I thought that was really important, instead of just blurting all this stuff out, let him deal with it on his level. And I think we need to do that with our students too. And sometimes we lose patience with them.
I picture his mom being somebody, you know, she commented like she didn't feel like she had to explain her life to other people to justify it. In this day and age with Facebook, just being like ignoring all the haters, you know, that are commenting, you know what Anth was doing this past week, you know, just not getting caught up in it. She didn't worry about the people that weren't close to her. That's kind of the impression I got, you know, and I admire her for that. You know, I'm going to do what I want to do on my terms, and she didn't really feel like she needed to explain to anybody but her son. This is who I am. This is what I've done, why I've done what I've done. I'm not worried about what other people think. And I wish a lot more of us could kind of live like that, not getting caught up in, wonder what so-and-so thinks about me. Well, I got to, you know, and unfortunately, good thing she wasn't around with social media.
No kidding.
I think that I wanted to point out talking about having the sight. I think that is so interesting. That stood out to me because my family has talked about that, having the sight, having that in the family. And I know that sounds crazy, but I don't know, supposedly it works in sevens. And my grandmother always talked about that the seventh child, and they wouldn't talk about it. They were real hush hush about it. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want the knocking spirits to get you and all this kind of stuff. And I would always laugh about it. But my sister and I just had this conversation maybe 3 nights ago after I read this. And I was like, Tiffany, I was like, other people know about the spirits. And I was like, it's just not our family. We're not weird. And and when I read this, it cracked me up. But I wonder if it's just a cultural thing that people think that the sight, and what's weird is the mom, you know, really believe, well, I mean, who knows? I mean, the aunt told her, you know, her sister told her she was going to die. I don't know. I just think that's strange that the cultural thing there where she said, you know, I believe it. I'm going to write this letter to you. And I just found that so powerful. I don't know. That was really powerful to me.
I also wonder, as you're talking though, Heather, I wonder if it was in a lot of ways, a self-fulfilling prophecy as well. You know, she lived a pretty reckless life in a lot of ways, you know, and so was that reckless life as a result of, I'm not going to make it long anyway. I'm going to live as crazy and as wild as I can while I have the time. Whereas if she had never been told that, would life have been different? And we don't know those things.
Come on, Ronnie. You know, I'm sitting here thinking I'm going to get the site someday.
You might.
That kind of thing is actually a very common theme in Appalachian literature, having the sight or being very spiritual. And I think a lot of it comes from, ancestors. I think, a lot of the Irish culture that comes to Appalachia. But also, I think it also comments on the religion aspect of things too, how people are spiritual and religious and how those things come together in the region.
Yeah. So do y'all think this was a blessing or a curse, the ability to be able to have this second sight?
A curse, according to Easter. She didn't feel like it was a blessing.
Heather, when you get your sight, what do you think? Blessing or curse?
Well, I can tell you that my grandmother talked about her grandmother having it. And she was Grandma Picklesommer, and they called her Grandma Pickle. And Grandma Pickle hated the knocking spirits, and they drove her crazy, and she would pray for them to go away. And so she warned her grandchildren not to bring them on. And so, when my grandmother died, her sister told me, don't ever bring them on. And I said, well, how do you bring them on? And I won't do it. And she said, oh, I'm not going to tell you. So I don't know if I can bring them on or not.
Heather, just a sidebar, Kay Parker, who was formerly with our office, her maiden name is Picklesommer. So.
Oh, really?
Y'all may be related down the road.
You never know. There's another Grandma Pickle.
I do feel for Easter though, just because she had the premonition about her sister, and then she basically told her sister's husband where she was at.
Yeah.
Where they were out on the road, which ultimately led her to. So I know
You're getting too far ahead, Justin.
No, that's in that 14.
That's in that.
Is it?
That's in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like what, chapter 13, 12. There's a whole chapter about how they died. I just assumed it was a car wreck.
Me too.
And it wasn't. But basically, and it's right after I think she realizes the gravity of I basically told him where they were at, and then what led to that and stuff. So just imagine the guilt that she's felt, because she actually goes to Clay's house, is getting ready to go in and tell him, and she changes her mind and stuff. So just the guilt that I kind of foresaw this, whether you believe in that or not, and the fact that I told her husband where she was at, basically, which then he turned around and did what he did. If you haven't read those chapters, I won't spoil it, but it's not good. Which led to all that. And and she's been carrying that around his whole life. And so just imagine and that's probably one reason why she has clung to him. It's her nephew, but also probably the guilt.
The burden. Yeah.
All right. So I had a list of notes, and we've covered most of them, and we probably don't have a whole lot of time to get into some of the others, which seem a little heavier. But I want us to take just a couple of minutes, and I want us to be thinking about. I'll set my little timer and give us just maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3, to think about 2 questions that you have that have emerged through your reading that you'd want to ask Silas about. So I'm going to give us an assignment right now. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes. I want you to jot down a couple of questions that have emerged from the literature to help lead the discussion that we're going to have with Silas in 2 weeks. So we'll go ahead and do that. Let's get ready for that. I'm going to start my timer, and we'll do just 2 minutes to get us going.
I'm going to play some thinking music.
Play some thinking music. Oh, I hope it's Loretta Lynn. When you're looking at me, you're looking at country. Katie, I don't know if you're playing music just for you, but it's not for anybody else. We never had any.
Do you have it now?
Hey, yeah, there we go.
I was muted. I never said I was playing it for everybody. I said I'm going to play me some thanking music.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So I see many of you putting questions into the chat. That's perfect. We'll capture those and make sure that we have those as kind of guiding our discussion with Silas in a couple of weeks. But I'm going to challenge us as we continue reading through the book and continue having these conversations is to keep thinking about what questions that you're going to have. One of the things that we talked about, kind of the underbelly of the religion and drugs and all that, I didn't realize how prevalent drugs were in the community. To the level that they are in this book. For example, I did not understand, even growing up in this environment, that Coke was so readily available. That is a surprise for me in this book. Maybe I didn't know anybody who had enough money to buy Coke, but it seemed like it was used a lot, more than I kind of was expecting it to be used. And so it's very interesting, some of those things that I'm learning through this. And so there's lots of really good questions over there about, you know, the prevalence of drugs in the community, your life experiences, how it connects back to this, all of those things. So keep writing those questions, and we'll keep using those as we start our conversations with Silas in just a couple of weeks. So next week we will be back in this meeting next Thursday at 10 a.m. We'll be hitting the second half of the book that starts at chapter 15. I think, let's see what it's called, something. It is called
I've got to ask, is that Central Time or Eastern Time?
It's Eastern Time, the same as this week. And part 2, which is Flying Bird. So we'll be covering that entire section next week and kind of wrapping up our part of this as we get into the others. So thank you all again for being here. We hope you're enjoying the book. I hope you're seeing ways that you can use this in your classes, how you can engage students in conversations around the themes that are emerging from this book. And next week, we'll get into some of the additional things in the Flying Bird section and then wrap up from there. So thank you all for being here, and we will see you next week, next Thursday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Bye, everybody.